So let me say where I agree with Levin and where I hesitate a bit. I've been in dialogue with Mike for several years now, and I'm really excited, thrilled even by his research and many of his theoretical moves. I think he's absolutely right to resist genetic reductionism, of course, and to insist that organismic agency is driving morphology and morphogenesis. The mechanistic picture, as classically conceived, traded almost exclusively in efficient causes, that is, pushes from behind, as it were, where parts are externally related to other parts. Genes push molecules, molecules push cells, cells push tissues, and somehow at the end of this chain of pushing, you get an organism. But obviously, or I hope obviously, this story misses something essential. Cells, tissues, organisms exhibit large-scale patterns and homeoresis, really an astonishing degree of error correction and ingenuity in the face of perturbations from the environment and from the stochasticity of molecules within the cell membrane. So these are not just mechanical outcomes of some kind of biochemical pinball game. They look much more like the work of agents responding to what Whitehead would call lures or pulls from ahead. And I think Levin's work, his empirical experimental lab work, is showing precisely this, foregrounding this sense of a lure or a pull from ahead. So his xenobots, anthrobots, they're making it vividly clear that you can chop up and recombine living tissues into configurations that evolution, the phylogenetic history of that organism never saw before. And yet, these novel life forms can spontaneously discover coherent morphologies and behaviors. The organism then is not simply pushed into shape by its past, it's reaching toward possible futures, forms that have not yet ingressed in its lineage. So far, so good. I affirm the reintroduction of formal and final causality into biology. But where I begin to hesitate is the way that Levin sometimes describes the relation between patterns and their embodiments. He uses interface in a technical computing sense, terminals, thin clients that are front-ending a distant mainframe, right? And his warning is that if you theorize only the front end, you misdiagnose, misunderstand the system. And, fair enough so far as that analogy goes. But my worry is that there's a slide here from front end to mere puppet, basically. So it's as if agency is living elsewhere and bodies, organisms are but sort of nothing more than disposable terminals. So on this picture, agency belongs to the patterns that exist in some sort of a trans-spatio-temporal morphospace, while bodies, organisms, are the thin user interfaces, scratch pads, as I've heard Levin describe them, upon which those patterns inscribe their designs. So this is a kind of bifurcation that I worry repeats the old split of a kind of two-world Platonism that I really want to overcome. Now, we can question whether a two-world ontology is really what Plato is articulating in his dialogues. I'm not going to get into that right now because that's not really Mike's interest. But I want to avoid this kind of dualism between agential forms and mere bodies that are steered around or puppeteered by those forms. This risks assigning all the reality to abstract patterns, all the agency to abstract patterns, and it demotes organismic life to something more or less like an epiphenomenal display. So I want what I would call a reformed process relational Platonism, in which, along the lines of Whitehead's philosophy, in which organisms are the present locus of decision, even as they orient themselves in relationship to a structured realm of relevant possibilities or eternal objects in Whitehead's terms. So there is a real living constellation of forms, but its patterns are not puppeteers. They are not the agents. The agency is with the organisms. The decision is made by organisms as to which forms to ingress. So to make forms agents is, and thereby render bodies passive, is, on my reading, a version of what Whitehead warned against as the fallacy of misplaced concreteness.